Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Julien Cayla, and I'm from the business school down the road, Nanyang Business School. I probably shouldn't say this, but I think being from a rival university, but I think this is a fantastic conference. It's great to be able to interact with managers, to have them so actively involved in a conference like this on luxury. Just a few words about my co-authors. The second author, Jean-Baptiste, is not only a professor, but he's also a consultant, and he works with many luxury brands. And so the data that I'm going to show you, I think is quite unique data, and because it comes from a consulting project where the client basically allowed us to observe what happens inside luxury stores. What happens in luxury boutiques? That's the main kind of question that we had with this project. And Eileen Fisher, probably many of you know her as the former editor of JCR. For those of you who are not millennials, you probably remember this movie. How many of you remember this movie? Right? Yes. Now, I was going to play a scene from this movie. It was going to make you very nostalgic, I'm sure. And we have some sound problems, so I'm not going to play it. But basically, this movie illustrates what I would call the logic of distinction, which is one logic that is important in luxury retail. You remember a scene where basically Julia Roberts goes shopping in this outfit, and basically, she faces some salespeople who judge her outfit as not belonging to a luxury retail setting. And then she comes back, and it's kind of like the Cinderella story where she comes back and she's dressed very well, and suddenly she's the queen of that environment. And that illustrates what I would call the logic of distinction, which is one way of thinking about luxury. And there is a great book, for example, that talks about this logic in luxury hotels. We had a session before on luxury hotels, which talks about luxury hotels as places where basically luxury service workers act as class brokers. In that particular study, they talk about how people who look like they belong to the space are given advantages, right? They're treated differently. So in some ways, that's here the role of the luxury boutique as we call in marketing demarketing, right? Demarketing is about basically excluding some customers and selecting some customers whom you think belong to the retail space. And that's basically a logic that I've been talked about in research as a logic where it's all about exclusive privilege of the elite who use luxury and luxury spaces as signs of distinction. All right, and that is consistent with Pierre Bourdieu's work on consumption as a way to signal belonging to a social class. But I guess the problem and the question we have in this research is that luxury in general and luxury retailing in particular is changing. And there are a few changes that are important to consider when we think about luxury. There's the globalization of demand. We've talked about Chinese consumers in the previous session as 1/3 of the luxury market. That was not true 10 years ago. We have some of my colleagues who do work on experiences, consumer psychologists who talk about the importance of experiences, right? Luxury experiences as becoming more and more important. And then finally, the third big change is the digital kind of turn and the fact that consumers increasingly shop for luxury goods online. So given all of these changes, I guess the question that we're tackling is that does the logic of distinction still dominate the field of luxury? That's our main research question. And I'm not going to go through this slide too extensively. This is more academic, but it's basically the theoretical framework that we use, which is institutional theory, which talks about basically fields comprised of actors and logics. And logics are basically material practices there are symbolic constructions that structure markets, right? The way we might say that the field of education, for example, has different logics, right? There's the logic of your student as consumer and the logic of your student as just a student, right? So the logic of the market and the logic of education, right? So, and we want to understand basically how logic multiplicity basically operates in the luxury retail context. In other words, in more simpler terms, how do luxury managers manage a field that is becoming more and more heterogeneous? All right, and that's related to some research that has been done using institutional theory, looking at, for example, the plus-sized market and how customers are bringing basically new logics into a market because they feel they are not being served appropriately in that market. And so that's our research questions. What's in addition to the logic of distinction, are there other logics informing consumers' experience in luxury stores? And if so, what are the implications for managers of logic multiplicity? So it's a very managerial type of paper that we're sending to the Journal of Marketing. The methodology involved doing participant observation, right? It means actually, some of the team basically worked in luxury stores with usually one local ethnographer who was familiar with the culture where we were, and basically another team member. We also did 80 interviews with luxury customers of the boutique. So these are not your lipstick customers, right? These are regular luxury customers, some of them spending more than 20,000, 30,000 euro a year on some of these retail outlets. And so the list of customers was given to us by the brands. These were, the sites. We did this research in. We did this research in, in France, in the U.S., in China, and in Japan, which at the time were considered to be like the key markets for these luxury companies across the different brands. And then we basically tried to analyze this data, this very large data set. And we highlight basically, apart from the logic of distinction, three main logics. One is the logic of hedonism, which is basically about enjoying the materiality, the sensoriality of the products and the experiences. The logic of commercial relationships. This is basically customers for whom the main point of entry into luxury is the salesperson, who talk to us a lot about salespeople when they talk about luxury and luxury store. And then finally, and I think since we're talking a lot about Chinese consumers, there's one logic which we call the logic of pragmatism, which is about a focus on getting good value in exchange for the price that is paid, and trying to basically save time, save money. We could also call them more utilitarian types of consumers. And what's interesting, I think, for that particular segment is that they tend to avoid or devalorize the logic of distinction, the ritualized, the ceremonial kind of basically sales process that is the logic of distinction. All right. So the logic of hedonism, and I have big quotes. Maybe I'm not going to read all of them, but this is a customer in New York who says, when I think of the pens, I have a warm and fuzzy feeling about them that the ambiance of the store does not connect to. I'm more of a romantic. One of the things that I would rely on the store is the ability to touch, to hold, to feel. I remember there was one pen called the Star Walker, so this is about Mont Blanc. It was on the wall. I don't even think I could touch it and hold it and relate to it. I had to wait for the grand honor of someone to come and ceremoniously take it out and stand there. With luxury products, I want to see how they're made. I want to hold them. I want the weight in my hand. I want the hand feel against the textile. That's what's important to me. And I think that when that customer talks about that, the ceremonial aspects of luxury, in a sense, is kind of like devaluing the kind of rituals that are associated with the logic of distinction. Instead, what he's interested in is really the objects, right, the sensations. Another customer we went to Tiffanys, and this is a customer who went to on a shopping trip with her cousin was 18-year-old, I think. She was all upset, that cousin, about the crowds. I said, let's go across the street. They will take good care of us. I said, can she try on some jewelry? And Marianne, the saleswoman, had not only the 18-year-old, but her sister and her mother all in necklaces, earrings, and bracelets. They had a huge ring that was like 40 carats. It was gigantic. It was just like dress up. It was so much fun. It was like a healing experience after the bad experience at Tiffanys. So I think what's interesting here as well is this idea of basically playing with luxury products, right? Not necessarily basically adoring them at a distance, not necessarily luxury as a kind of spectacle, but this kind of basically hedonic play that comes out in a lot of the interviews that we did. The logic of commercial relationships. So I'm not a luxury customer. I'm a poor professor, but so I guess so I'm still intimidated, by the world of luxury boutiques. But at least for a segment of customers, what surprised me with regular luxury customers is that this is almost like a second home for some of them. And when they talk about luxury retail, often they are very loyal to specific salespeople, right? And this day and age where we talk a lot about branding, we talk a lot about digital and so on, we forget about the importance of salespeople, right? And so this is, and especially like our data, especially data we collected in the US, talks a lot about commercial relationships. And they talk about their favorite salespeople, Lee and Marianne. I socialized with them. Lee has come to my town. We had brunch. We're trying to get Marianne up this weekend to go to a psychic. She likes psychics. They invest in the background of how you got the jewelry. Then you end up telling them these personal stories about yourself. You ask them questions about their puppies. You have this little backstory. You make connections. You can always ask about that. This is a customer talking about a particular salesperson. And that was really interesting to see, for example, that some of those regular luxury customers were ready to switch brands basically when their favorite luxury salesperson was going to another brand. That's an isolated kind of case, but some of them do that. One of the things that's also surprised me is the exchange of gifts. And that was not only from the brand's perspective, like from salespeople's perspective, but also we saw in China, but also in Japan, right? This is from Japan, the picture, where we saw a lot of customers buying gifts for the salespeople, in some ways often to get limited edition items, right? So for Timmy, I buy ties. For Jane, I gave her scarves, Hermes scarves. I owe a lot to her. She helps us find limited edition products. I feel I must thank her with a gesture. I know it's their job, but I do not see her or him simply as a sales assistant. All right, so that's commercial relationship. And then finally, the one which I think conflicts the most with the logic of distinction. In other words, the one that is the hardest to combine with the logic of distinction is the logic of pragmatism. And we saw that not only for Chinese customers, we saw that for other types of customers, other nationalities. This is an American woman who talks about, I go online, I research everything, and the website of Montblanc is even more tragic than the store. It's impossible to find anything. It's a time waster. It's way too full of itself. I would have to say the same mindset of the store in inconvenience. Yes, you love this, right? Because this is a competitor. Yes. I would have to say the same mindset of the store in inconvenience. So inconvenience is the main word here, right? So the pragmatic logic is basically trying to avoid, time and financial inconveniences, right? That would be my definition of the logic of pragmatism. And especially we saw a lot of consumers, especially Chinese consumers, trying to negotiate, right? So no matter how much I spend, there's no negotiating prices. If you want to save money, you have to go abroad. The sales manager asked me if I prefer exclusive stores or the agent. I would rather have a discount. if the quality is the same. It was a lot about getting good value and avoiding time and financial inconveniences. So, I have a lot more data that I could show you. If you want, I'm happy to share the paper with you, but I just want to get into the implications, I think, for managers, since we're lucky to have some managers to exchange with. So the logic of the different logics have different bases of value, different types of basically focus of attention or different practices. The logic of distinction is really about signaling. It's about signaling your status. In the luxury store, it's about having rituals and ceremonies that signal distinction, that give distinction. The hedonic logic is a lot about sensorial pleasure. It's focused on the objects, materiality, on interacting with the goods, while the logic of commercial relationships is about interacting with salespeople, it's about sociability. And finally, pragmatism is about benefits versus cost analysis, efficiency, and it's a lot about information and negotiation. So in terms of theoretical contribution, basically we're trying to move away from this idea of the logic of distinction and try to portray luxury as a field where you have logic multiplicity. Now, for managerial recommendations, I guess there are two main recommendations. One is to develop the hybridity of luxury boutiques in a way that caters to these different logics. So if we take Van Cleef, for example, in the way that they use what they call a bridal bar, right, which mixes the codes of F&B basically in the luxury format. It's, in a sense, a way to socialize new luxury customers through touch, through basically a less distinction-oriented type of logic. And I think that the hedonic logic, with the success of pop-up stores as an illustration, is a good way to socialize new customers into luxury. Édition du Parfum Frédéric Malle is also a good example, I think, of focusing on the senses, right, where they have in the boutiques. So they obviously look very exclusive boutiques, but they're also focused basically on smelling the perfume, without any other influences. So really a focus on the product, on the perfume itself, rather than what it signals. The other route is basically to try to have a portfolio strategy that accommodates the diversity of customers, right? And our idea basically is that there are different types of, and since we have different managers here in the room, I'm happy to, for you to make some comments if I say anything stupid, but I think that the heritage store is more suited to this distinction logic, while the hedonic logic is obviously more articulated in the pop-up store. The pragmatic logic, let's say customers who want something fast, convenient, efficient, is more suited to the department store, the duty-free outlet, while the commercial relationship, I would say, is more suited to a more intimate space, like I would call it a luxury boutique. And salespeople are going to play a different role in those different types of outlets. One of the things we did as part of this research is we observed the training of luxury salespeople for a major luxury brand. What we saw is a lot of training around this, to keep the codes of the brand and to basically signal exclusivity. And one of the questions we have for managers is basically, is there room basically to train salespeople to be more trained around these other logics to accommodate the diversity of customers. So, the hedonic logic, as I said, is quite well expressed through the pop-up store, especially to socialize new customers. And, I think it's opening this year. I don't know if it's opened yet, but what's interesting about Galeries Lafayette is they're opening another department store across the street from their main store in Boulevard Haussmann, which is basically to enable Asian, especially Chinese customers, to basically get the largest number of luxury brands in the minimum amount of time. And in some ways, I think that's consistent with our argument that increasingly luxury brands will have to accommodate what we call the pragmatic logic. I think in terms of combining a pragmatic logic and a distinction logic, I think what brands are doing in China around basically combining online and distinction, having someone with white gloves basically deliver to you your luxury good is an interesting example of combining the two logics. All right, so I know we're taking questions at the end. Thank you very much. Yeah.